Good afternoon and welcome to today's Adweek webinar. Are you making the most of customer feedback? Sponsored by Reputation. I'm Melissa Ward, Managing Editor of Branded Content at Adweek, and I'll be your host for today. Before we begin, I want to take a few minutes to make sure everyone knows what to expect from today's webinar and is familiar with the features of our platform. The actual presentation should go somewhere in the 30 to 40 minute range, after which we'll have time for audience Q&A. So if at any point you have a question for our speakers, just use the Q&A tool on the left side of your screen, and we'll get to as many questions as we can after the end of the live presentation. Also, it's not too late to invite your colleagues to join us at today's webinar. About 15 minutes ago, you received a final reminder email from us. In there, you'll find a link to the webinar registration page that you can share with your colleagues. There's still plenty of time for them to join us live, but if they can't, we understand. Today's webinar is being recorded and they can always catch the on-demand version. In fact, the on-demand recording is available to all of our registrants. We'll be sending you a link later today when it's live around 3:30 Eastern. And if you'd like a PDF of today's slide deck, you'll find it in the Event Resources tab at the top of your screen. As always, if you enjoy today's webinar, definitely check out the full Adweek webinars calendar at adweek.com/webinars. You'll see what we have coming up, and you'll also get access to our archive of on-demand webinars. Now, let me introduce you to today's speakers. We're happy to be joined by David Mingle, VP of Customer Experience at Reputation. David is a proven senior executive, mentor, and strategic advisor with a passion for experience management and business transformation. Megan Merrick, Associate Director of Innovation and Brand Experience at Freshly. In her role, Megan strategizes technological advances for the Customer Experience Department. And finally, we're joined by Andy Carpenter, Solutions Engineer at Reputation. Andy leverages strategy, data, technology, and more to ensure productivity and efficiency for his clients. We have some fantastic content to jump into today. So let me first bring everybody up on screen. Do that real quick. And let me hand it off to David to get started.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. And hey, Megan. Hey, Andy. How you doing today?
Pretty good. How are you, David?
Awesome. Ready to jump in?
Rock and roll.
Great. So Andy, next slide. So here is what we are going to do today. We are going to talk about how best-in-class brands leverage feedback. We're going to provide real-life examples so that hopefully the content and the concepts that we're sharing with you become very real and you can apply that back at home in your own CX programs. And we're going to provide very specific ways that you can simplify your CX data and effortlessly incorporate that feedback into your overall CX strategy. So we're going to start with the power of feedback. That is the power, specifically the feedback that you receive from your customers and from your employees. And frankly, why should you care? Because CX in most industries is the new battleground. It is where customers are being won or lost, is less so around product and more so around experiences and the services and everything else that comes with that product. And studies also show that brands that excel in CX outperform their peers in terms of revenue growth and shareholder returns. So let's first discuss that premise that customer feedback and insights can help grow your business and drive better business results. What do you think, Megan?
I think that this is very, very important. Definitely why we're here today. And at Freshly, we've worked really hard over the past year and especially over the past about 8 months to really be able to streamline processes around feedback and how we share those insights internally so that way we can actually create actionable items out of it as opposed to just sharing complaints or verbatims. And what it really came down to was the fact that we're seeing so much feedback online. And when we were talking to other departments, they'd ask us if we had an opinion on whatever. And we would say, yeah, our customers talk to us about that all the time. And they had no idea that we were actually having these really fruitful conversations about our product and our website and our service. And just because our agents were handling the feedback and it was assumed that our reports and our data were being shared around internally, it didn't always mean that the reports were getting into the hands of people who could actually drive change in those individual verticals. And a great example of that was when we were getting a lot of feedback on our meal trays. Freshly is a meal kit. We deliver fresh prepared meals directly to your doorstep, and they come in these plastic trays. And we were seeing that customers were complaining that they were wearing in transit, sometimes showing up with just a piece of the tray in the box, but none of the trays of their meals were actually broken. And it made for such a not tasty experience. And once we realized it was a trend, we took it to our packaging engineers and we showed them the pictures. We showed them the number of times we were having these conversations. And it turned out that some of the trays were actually showing up stuck together in our kitchens. And when they were being pulled apart for the meals to be put in, some of the trays were breaking. And the team internally thought we're getting rid of the trays. They didn't realize that some of those pieces were making it further down the line and ending up in boxes. And once we were able to get that story told, it was very easy for not only the team to fix that, but then also a great opportunity for us to go back to those customers and say, hey, thanks for sharing that with us. We fixed it. And, that's just a great full circle opportunity to have a conversation with our customers.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that conversation that you're having with customers isn't just happening between you and the customer. It's happening out there in the marketplace, right? As the internet is changing and we're all sort of engaging with it in different ways, you see more and more what used to be a conversation like, hey, I got my meal tray and my food's all over the place. I'm maybe telling my neighbor or a friend or, my parents, when we check in, they're asking how I'm doing. But nowadays I can go on social. I can be speaking specifically to the brand on social or leaving a review on all these different places for this feedback to be gathered. And so it's really, paramount for businesses to be on top of and monitoring this feedback and all these different channels that it's coming into. Because not only are you ensuring a positive experience for your customer, especially in the situation that there's a negative experience, but also in and of the fact that the places that these businesses and potentially your business is getting found, those reviews and that feedback are now getting woven into the infrastructure of what Google and some of these other search sites are doing and taking account of when it's determining who and how is ranking. So this feedback, the more you can collect of it, the more positive it can be, more than likely you're also going to have higher visibility and, down the line, more sales.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially for us, we're entirely a digital experience. We don't have a storefront or a brick and mortar location where someone can come and interact with our product prior to purchasing it or our team prior to purchasing it. The only way you can interact with Freshly is online, which leads to a lot of avenues for communication, but also a lot of avenues for feedback, whether it's social media or Google listings or review sites, blogs, social ads, our general CX contact channels. The feedback across our channels is generally similar. If we're hearing it on one channel, we're probably hearing it on another. But like you said, Andy, just because somebody posts something online, that is now woven into a customer's onboarding experience with us. And if they're looking to see what the Freshly experience is prior to purchasing, they're probably going to come across those conversations, whether we want them to or not, which is why it's so important for us to be part of those conversations and help guide them.
Yeah. Here's an example from one of the Google reviews that you received in the past, couple of months. Making sure that you're on top of experiences like this, and also that you're communicating with that customer is really a big deal.
Absolutely.
So, from there, right here, this is just one of a number of examples where you can start to see the sort of the ecosystem is changing, right? You think about customer experience, and more often than not, the first place your head is usually going is to surveys, right? Everybody's taken them. Everyone's been asked to take them, and you probably haven't taken as many as you've been asked to. But right, this was traditionally how businesses relied on all of that feedback, because otherwise they didn't have the ability to monitor it. But today, in sort of today's landscape, surveys account for just 6% of the total amount of feedback that is available to a brand today. A lot of this feedback is in other places, right? And many times it's unsolicited. So these are what sometimes we'll call data in the wild, right? You can't control what people are saying out there. And it could include reviews that are related to, your product or your service, or the people and staff and the employees who are administering said business experience to your customers. But it could also be, the comments and feedback that are left on social channels, right? People are using social media to talk about everything, but certainly to talk about your brand and your products and your services, to the point where it's become an ingrained feedback mechanism for a lot of businesses, right? Over the weekend, I was waiting on a ride from a rideshare service, for instance, that I won't name. And I was sitting in the app and I was clicking on it, and I just, there was no way for me to get my ride. So I ended up tweeting at that particular business, and that was how I engaged. And if not for, them monitoring that, my experience would have been not only a poor one, but a potentially dangerous one, because I had no way to get home. Right. And so not only on those social accounts, but also too, on the places where people are finding your business as well, right? More and more you see search engines like a Google, like a Bing, other places where not only are there reviews embedded within this listing in and of itself, but so too are there other ways that you can engage and potentially even now be messaging that particular business that will influence a customer's likelihood to click through to the brand's other digital experiences, right? It's kind of like your front door, and making sure that that is as engaging as possible to give that customer a positive experience is really paramount in sort of today's day and age, where that expectation is there that I can make a reservation or place an order through whatever Google's showing me. And of course, there's also, everything in between. The list goes on. It's going to constantly evolve. I couldn't have told you 10 years ago that the internet was going to look like this today. And I won't pretend to tell you what it's going to look like in 5 years, right? 10, 15 years ago, email surveys were the dominant source of feedback for a lot of brands. And now it's become sort of this data in the wild. Think about devices too, right? Customers now, because phones are so ingrained in the way that we use and engage with the world, they're more, your customers are more likely to use their thumbs to tell you what they think these days than your keyboard. And is your experience, is your offering aligning to that? How you are engaging with your customers is really important, right? Call centers, was sort of the gold standard, and now they're being displaced by online forums and self-service capabilities, chatbots, all that sort of a thing where, experience is that you need to listen to just as intently as you do the voice recordings and the calls that you're getting, in through those channels.
Yeah, Andy, you're absolutely right. And the cost or the risk to your business of not managing it well is huge. Megan, I'd love to get your feedback on some of these stats here, but 22% of prospects look elsewhere after reading just one negative review about your products or your services. 71% of customers that receive positive social customer care are likely to recommend your brand. You didn't mention the rideshare company, but I wish they probably wish that you would have, because they were there when you needed it in the channel of your choice. And that then obviously saved what otherwise could have been a very disappointing experience for you, Andy, right? And where the rubber meets, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just saying, it was Lyft. But
okay. Well,
right.
Probably only one of two that it could have been. So that's great. But hey, and there is in fact what an ROI associated with this, right? A return on investment, because things like how many customers you save or costs that you can reduce by being active in these channels is very real. But there's also this idea of kind of cost of ignoring, COI, if you will, or the cost of, maybe it's not ignoring, maybe it's cost of inaction, and watching the world out there in social and reviews go by, but not actually engage in it. Megan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I love when I see social customer care highlighted, because that's one of the things that I have been most proud of watching grow at Freshly, is how seriously we've taken our social media presence and really tried to lean on that as a contact channel for our customers, primarily because, like I mentioned before, we are a digital commerce company and people find us on social media and that's where they go for support. But really leaning on the idea of negative reviews. It's funny because about a year and a half ago, I used these exact same statistics. They might have been a little bit different then, but these exact numbers were what I used to prove the importance of reputation management to our team, especially the idea of, if we are not engaging with this feedback, our customers will dictate the conversation for us, and we don't have an opportunity to, potentially prove ourselves, but also more importantly, we don't have an opportunity to make the situation right. And really what got our Voice of Customer VOC program really started was when we were able to streamline the data across the feedback and across our touch points to be able to tell a story that was all encompassing of all those different touch points you mentioned, Andy, from NPS surveys to CSAT surveys to online reviews, listings, social media, the list goes on. If we can't take all of that data and be able to say, this is really what our customers care about, internally the teams are kind of saying, okay, well, you got a couple of comments on social here, you got a couple of reviews there, but that's just a couple people's experience. If you can go and say people are really having these conversations, that was much better for us. And one of the big things at Freshly is the fact that we use third-party delivery services like a FedEx or a UPS in order to deliver our products. Logistics is quite complex, and the feedback loop needs to be very tight for us. And it's not just internal to Freshly, it's external to our partners. And if we're seeing this feedback on the last mile and we're not doing anything about it, people in these different regions, when they look to sign up for Freshly, they're going to look for reviews and see, oh, well, I'm in New York. This person in New York had a really bad delivery experience. I probably don't want to sign up because I'll have a similar one. But if we can take that experience and make it into something positive, or at least attempt to make that situation right, somebody else may be more willing to give us a chance, like you did with Lyft, Andy, because they were there for you when you needed them.
Well, yeah, and what ends up happening, certainly no one likes to see those nasty grams come across the dashboard. But when you've had a negative experience and you then receive a positive one, it creates more brand loyalty and real brand champions out of those people, right? No one expects a business to be perfect, and when that's acknowledged and rectified is how people become loyal. But if that customer experience data is ignored, or it's left in certain silos, or that it hasn't been acted on, that can also be potentially damaging. Megan, have you seen this affect Freshly?
Yeah, you know what? Honestly, absolutely. Especially over the last year, as we have really scaled our reputation management program, our Voice of the Customer program, feedback has become more important. And we really had to break down the silos in order to share the data. And honestly, to be able to make sure that nobody felt targeted when we shared that data, because people take their job super seriously. I take my job super seriously. If someone came to me and said, oh, well, there are these negative reviews online about CX, I would be upset about it. And the problem that we got was there were so many cooks in the kitchen because everybody was looking at CX from their own point of view and was identifying the KPIs to define success for them. And because everybody was reaching for their own version of success, we weren't giving a streamlined experience. So, for example, if our growth team, our marketing team wanted to reach certain sales goals, other areas may be bent or corners could be cut in order to reach that. And so by using technology to really bridge the gap, we were able to make it clear, first of all, what our goals were and how we define success, but also make it clear how our customers were feeling about what we were reaching for, what we were offering them. And if we're still struggling with a certain area of our business and our customers are upset, we can create new benchmarks for success in order to be able to solve those problems.
Another aspect that we haven't talked about yet, Andy, is around speed to action. So it's not just being able to respond, but be able to do so at scale and at a velocity that otherwise isn't possible. Think of many of our customers. We have a huge footprint in automotive, in retail, in healthcare, that all have very complex distribution networks. So either it be a dealer or doctor's offices or individual store locations, all kinds of things could be happening at that level. And without always on listening and listening through all of these different channels, it may take weeks or even months, or maybe not even at all, to find bad behavior or bad experiences happening at an individual location, and having your regional management or especially your HQ management never even know about it. But now, if you can listen at what I call altitude, your surveys are kind of a one-to-one. It's kind of a ground zero interaction, right? Typically right after someone has bought something or brought maybe something back in for service, there's a transaction of some sort that has triggered that survey. And that's typically one customer talking to one store or one call center manager about their experience. The next level up is reviews, where it's one person talking to their network. So it's a one-to-many kind of thing. And if that person is an influencer, that many may not just be a small number of people, but it could be thousands of people that they could potentially influence. At the highest level is kind of many-to-many, which is social. Being able to aggregate all of the banter around your brand and in your products and your services, and to quickly make sense of it, to see if it maybe some of those things that are happening in an individual location are happening on, inside the discussion around reviews and whatnot, whether that's actually impacting your overall brand opinion. And you need to be able to do all of that type of listening in real time and have the processes in place to be able to act upon that data.
Yeah. There's kind of, micro, sort of that micro issue of the speed and the velocity of getting that individual customer, but then also the ability to take a step back and go macro, right?
Right.
And, all right, what are the things that our customers are telling us to do? And that's where we're driving our roadmap, or that's where we're driving the changes and the adjustments that we're making as far as the service delivery, the product delivery, that sort of thing. I imagine, Megan, you've got examples that you guys are doing out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Really leaning on social there. One of the big things that we used to see was going back to scaling sales, when marketing would run certain ads or they would run new campaigns in order to get customers or acquire customers. Sometimes CX would be unaware of those, whether it was email or on TV, but most often it was on social, because that was such a big channel for us. And when CX wasn't prepared, there were a lot of balls that were dropped, whether it was just being unaware that we were about to spend a lot of money on acquiring and we weren't prepared for the volume, but also more often than not, it was feedback. So, hey, my promo code's not working. And CX doesn't know what the promo code is, or they don't know what discount it is. They don't know how to apply it. They don't know how to fix it. And then we would see some negative reviews from that, honestly, where customers wouldn't get their discount when signing up, or they would get their discount, but they were just so frustrated with that experience. And once we were able to tie the two together and anything else we saw, whether it was in contacts or surveys or other blog posts or on social media, and be able to say, here's the story. This is, talking micro versus macro. This is what we're seeing across all of these individual channels, but also overall, this is the sentiment. This is the level of data we're getting back on this. We were able to put some processes in place to ensure CX would be aware of upcoming campaigns, and we would have that information at our fingertips. So that way, no matter how a customer finds out about Freshly, we're able to guide them through that sign-up process seamlessly.
Yeah, Annie, it's pretty amazing that we all kind of know this intuitively, and the CX industry as a practice is going on 20 years old. yet you see stats like you have on the screen here where there's still this huge gap between what customers expect brands to be able to do and what they are actually able to do. And able might be a technology thing, but as more times than not, in my experience, it has to do with the organization themselves deciding that customer experience is important enough for them to drive accountability from the C-suite all the way down to the front line.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really, can come in at any point of that customer journey, right, Dave?
Oh yeah. So if everything else we talked about is not complicated enough, you also have to be able to do it throughout the entire end-to-end customer journey, whether that's up front in the search experience. I think, Andy, you might have used this term earlier, but search really is experience number one for many customers. You've got to be able to get that right or run the risk of losing a customer before we even know who they are. And then in real time, while they are actively shopping you, what we call the get chosen phase, you've got to be there along the way. You've got to be able to see what customers are not just doing, but how they're feeling along the way so that you can figure out the appropriate next best action to take with that customer, either to continue them moving along the path they're already on, or to be there in the event that the experience isn't meeting their expectations. And of course, and this is where the rubber meets the road with any CX program, you can have all the data you want, you can have all the analytics you want, but ultimately, if you're not using it to drive improvements in your business, to, as we just got done talking about, repair bad experiences, identify process improvements so that those bad experiences don't happen in the first place, and ultimately to rethink the experience altogether and innovate how your entire company perhaps goes to market.
Absolutely.
So in my experience, after talking to CX leaders across our portfolio, we have more than 1,000 customers. We have individual customers that have more than 50,000 employees as registered on our platform, many of them using the platform every day, if not weekly, is that taking action, finding the actionable insights and taking action on them is the single biggest success factor for a CX program. So how does a senior executive use feedback to inform corporate strategy? If your C-suite is not asking the CX team or the entire organization about customers and what they feel and how they can do better, that's a missed opportunity. Next layer down, how's a business unit leader using feedback to drive new revenue opportunities, to improve retention or reduce cost? And all the way down to the front line, like how does an individual call center agent or someone behind the counter in one of your retail locations, how are they using that feedback to improve experiences for every individual person that walks through the front door? So, we've relied on customer experience data to create actionable insights and implement new strategies. I know within our business, Andy, but I'm wondering, Megan, have you got a specific example there, or maybe Andy, from some of your experience with some of our clients, maybe you can share one as well.
Yeah, you want to go ahead, Andy?
Yeah. It can be as broad as, when there was a lot of this analysis when sort of the pandemic came out, right? And, we work a lot in healthcare, for instance. So the recognition of the need for businesses to align and provide telehealth options and be communicating a little bit more differently about where testing sites might be or where people might be able to get that type of a care. How can we create these large scale, large volume types of business changes to be able to funnel people in, all the way down to, identifying that people really don't like seeing this eye doctor because he has bad breath, because he's all up in your face when they're doing the eye test and holding things over your eye. And it turned out the guy just ate a tuna fish sandwich every day. And, so whether it's at that small level of just giving the man a breath mint or the large one of changing how people are engaging with your brand altogether, those different pieces of feedback, can and should be feeding, how you are navigating the challenges and the opportunities that, the marketplace presents.
And Megan, you're in the fresh food business, so you got to be able to do all this stuff in real time. How do you make that happen?
We really do, because with the fact that we're delivering fresh meals, and there are a lot of touch points that leave opportunities for things to not go as well as we would like them to, whether it's preparing the meals in our kitchen, getting them shipped out with the carrier. Once that truck leaves our kitchen, there's a lot that can happen on the road, whether it's the truck doesn't get to the facility in time, it doesn't get to the person's house in time. We know that speed kills us, but we also know that speed can be to our benefit. And if we don't get those actionable insights, the moment we see something popping up, the moment we see a trend to the right people, it can have an impact on our business, sometimes a very devastating impact if, a new product or a new meal comes out that customers are just not loving. We don't want to spend more money on preparing a meal that people don't love and have people get that meal and complain about it, and then we have to credit them, when we could very easily get our chefs in the kitchen and make some changes right away.
So firsthand the value of really understanding customer sentiment. And research is really clear on this. That sentiment, that is how people feel about the experience they just had, is more important than the experience itself, meaning things like success. Did I accomplish what I wanted to do when I entered into the experience, or how easy was it? Those are all really important, but ultimately it's how the experience made them feel that drives future customer behavior, hopefully in a positive way, and drives them back to your brand rather than away from your brand.
Yeah, absolutely. Despite the fact that as a business, we can plan for every situation, and as a customer experience leader, I can prep my agents for every situation and give them best practices and talking points and the freedom to autonomously be able to make that customer feel better in the moment. There a lot factors into it: contact channel, automation, how quickly the agent addresses the issue, if the customer perceived their entire experience with us to be authentic. Despite the fact that we can have good intentions and we can do the right thing on paper, if we're missing any piece of that puzzle, it can really impact our customers' longevity with us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, it's almost like those quantitative scores, right? Your NPSs, your CSATs, et cetera. It's easy to be able to measure, but by themselves, from an insights and a learning perspective, aren't all that interesting, right? You really need to kind of combine those, quantitative metrics with ways to measure the qualitative, right? Understanding that sentiment, give you the why behind, what those numbers are saying, and then be able to turn that into actionable insights, kind of like we were talking about.
Exactly, Andy. So CX leaders know how to do three things in my experience. They know how to listen. I call that the what. Like, just go get the data in-house. Learn. I call that the so what. So we got a bunch of data, but what's the data telling me about my business that can help me be better? But ultimately, it's the now what. It's the acting and amplifying your story, your brand through better CX behaviors that drives the outcomes that you really want.
And a lot of times this means sort of, some groundbreaking, if pardon the pun, changes that are going on in the world right now. And we're seeing across industries, silos come down, departments that traditionally would be managing the reviews and the external facing piece of like a marketing team, now taking the information, the insights that they have and combining that with your customer experience departments to really form sort of a new partnership and category, right, Dave?
Yeah. We're really seeing insights become what I call a currency within an organization, a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of dynamic where people start to realize that sharing actually provides more net value to everybody than trying to keep the data in their respective silos. Megan, I'm sure you see this in your business.
100%. Like I mentioned, being able to provide a full picture for our cross-functional team was key for us. And when we didn't have the visibility across channels, like I mentioned, people they didn't want to hear us out all the time because we were just taking one little piece of feedback and saying, we see this a lot, isn't as valuable is being able to say, we've seen this 53 times in the past 24 hours, and here's all the commentary if you'd like to read through it. And, now that we've been doing that for about, again, 6 to 8 months, what we're now seeing is that teams are coming to us first when they want to make a change, when they want to innovate and push the experience further or make changes to our website. They'll say, hey, we're contemplating this. Here's the brief. Could you take a look and see if customers are talking about this, and if the feedback you're getting proves that we should do this, or is this not a valuable use of our time? And as a result, we really feel like not only CX has a seat at the table, but also our customer's voice has that seat at the table. And we can provide their insights when we're planning to launch something.
Yeah, that is super cool. I'm often asked, like, when do you know you're starting to win as a CX team? And it's exactly that. It's when the dynamic goes from push to pull. When you have people lining up at your door asking you for data rather than you forcing it on them, then you've started to change the hearts and minds of the organization. Super cool to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that pull can be coming from all sorts of different places too, right? So having a tool and more of a platform approach, right, to be examining and identifying all these opportunities, as far as consolidating these different data points all over the place, and then using that, those analytics to find those actionable insights in real time, and then get those and communicate those across the rest of the organization. Those are the ones that are best prepared and really empowered to be acting on this feedback and improving customer experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is what allows it to scale, right? So you start to bring all of your data in, put it in one place where it's easy for people across the organization to get access to it, because they can't all line up outside Megan's door. They have to be able to access it for themselves eventually, right? And figure out ways that they can make it actionable within their own groups. And importantly here too, it's not a technology play. I mean, yes, there's a lot of technology here, and we're a software company, so I don't want to downplay the value of the platform we have, but ultimately leadership needs to decide this is important. And the platform just enables those leadership directives to be implemented and scaled across the organization.
I have to imagine, Megan, that you agree. Is there anything, anything on your end that you could add to what Dave said?
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. I really believe that it's a top-down approach for how valuable CX insights can be to an organization. And it comes in layers. So, if my executives are saying, and they're showing me through their actions, yes, your feedback is important because we're going to use that cross-functionally to make improvements. But also for me, it's important to empower my agents to feel like, yes, the conversations you're having with our customers have value, have purpose, and those insights are important to us. So that way it doesn't just feel like, I'm having this conversation again, and I had this same conversation about, this person who didn't like the steak yesterday, and I'm probably going to have the same conversation tomorrow. Finding value in the fact that, yes, I'm having this conversation. Let me get the most out of this, squeeze the juice, get the information, because I know that this feedback is going to have a seat at the table when CX talks to product and engineering and marketing, logistics, the meals team. And then, from my perspective, being able to bring that feedback to the table and help them create insights and actions that are most important to our customers is honestly very, very cool. And it's great to be part of that.
So we're just about to the end of our time. So let me bring it full circle. What we talked about today was being able to listen everywhere all the time, whether your customers are talking you through social channels, through the digital experiences, including reviews, or on your websites, through messaging, any type of touch point like that, or through your traditional customer experience channels, be it your contact center, as Megan talked about, or your in-store experience. You need to be able to listen to everywhere that customer is and bring that data in, find actionable insights, and most important of all, drive action throughout the organization.
Absolutely. And, from as far as how best in class brands organize, that unstructured feedback and like reviews and survey responses and prioritize them, then, what the potential positive impact of leveraging this customer feedback across all these areas of businesses is it really gives you the opportunity to be in the driver's seat of where you want to take this, right? You have your customers and you have what they're telling you. And by taking that experience and aligning to what they want it to be, you can simplify that, effortlessly incorporate that into sort of your day-to-day and how your greater company is operating, which we know, across industries leads to results. So I think, certainly if you're curious on any more, certainly you can reach out. I know these links will be shared after the presentation. And Dave and I and Megan, I'm sure could talk for days. But, we want to actually make sure that we bring Melissa back because I know that there's some questions out from the field. So Melissa, if you want to jump back in, I'd love to hear what the team is all saying.
Absolutely. David, Megan, Andy, thank you all for such a fantastic presentation. I was taking notes the whole time, jotting down cost of ignoring, how social customer care search is experience number one. So that offered up a lot of great information for our audience today. So as Andy mentioned, we do have time to take a few questions. If you haven't already, please ask your questions by using the question tool on the left-hand side of your screen. We're going to try and get to as many of these questions as we can in the next 10 minutes or so. But if we don't get to your question, we always make sure they get forwarded over to our sponsor so that there's an opportunity to possibly reply offline. But first, a couple quick reminders before we jump into these questions. Today's webinar has been recorded and will be available on demand later this afternoon. We'll be emailing everyone a link to the recording. And if you want a copy of today's slides, you'll find a PDF in the event resources area at the top of your screen. So let me jump into some of these questions as they're coming in. My first question is this. How have you made it a priority on your team and across your organization to prioritize customer feedback? And Megan, could you take this one?
Sure, absolutely. For us, it's really been providing or showing, I suppose, the value in that feedback to the cross-functional team. Again, like I mentioned a couple times throughout the presentation, just bringing, we got this comment on social or customers are complaining about the checkout process isn't enough for the team to be able to really understand the weight of how much time CX is spending having those conversations, but how impactful that change could be for our customers and how much they would appreciate it. And again, coming back to sales, how that would help us in turn by making those changes. So really it came down to getting a cross-functional group together, which was just 1 to 2 people from each department in a room once per week where CX prepares all the data, what people are talking to us about, a selection of comments from each section, and then sharing that out and having an open conversation about what this impact is and how we can fix it.
Yeah, well, I'll add to that too. If we're talking about how that happens, certainly there's the organizational level, but then also the process of it, right? And building in metrics. I've seen a lot of clients who, are reporting on this more regularly and have set goals for their individual management and operators to be engaging, replying, responding, and even incentivizing the ones that are doing it the best, so that not only at the macro level you're understanding this, but at the micro level they're ensuring that each one of these engagements and interactions is going to be a positive one.
Great. So my next question is, do you find the CX team has a lot of overlapping responsibilities with other teams like customer service or social? And how do you handle that? And Andy, do you want to take first stab at that one?
Absolutely. And I can only imagine Megan and Dave both might have some more context to be able to add. But really what we're finding is that because, as we talked about a little bit earlier, these channels are changing where this feedback is being accepted, these teams need to be, because their traditional, in air quotes, responsibilities there are to be the ones who are interacting with that particular channel. And so if they're not having that customer experience piece in mind, there's no way for that to get to the people who can make the change. And similarly, it's important for the customer experience teams to understand what their roles and responsibilities are too, to be like, okay, their number one priority, if they're on the marketing team, is to, grow revenue or establish more leads, et cetera. How can I work myself into that workflow to make sure that they're also keeping in mind this very important customer experience part?
Yeah, Andy, what I would add to that is you've really got to understand your role within the organization. Sometimes the CX team may actually run the call center experience, in which case they are both kind of the planner and the strategist as well as the folks that execute. But there's so many people across an organization that actually touch the experience. There's no way that the CX team is going to be doing it all. So in that case, you take on a role of being a mentor, trying to teach people how to fish, not to do the fishing for them, because it doesn't scale if you are trying to do too much of the work or mandate how they do their work. You find out that the insights that matter, explain to them why, hopefully partner with them to solve a few customer experience challenges. They see the ROI, and then the next time around, they take on more of it and more of it. And after a few rounds of that, now you've got this push versus pull kind of dynamic where you've got a believer and they become very self-sufficient on their own.
Great. And Megan, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I would add that, especially for myself, I have been through this and lived it, where as part of the CX team, I was also involved with social media. And I suppose there was a push and pull slightly in a different way, I suppose, where it was difficult at times to understand what my role was, where I was sort of in the middle of two teams trying to help both. I was on CX trying to make sure that our customers were heard, while at the same time being on social and trying to help the brand grow and scale and acquire new customers. And being able to sort of really, we had to take a step back and understand how can we make the best of both worlds here and support the social media team and be involved in those conversations in a brand friendly way at all times. But also at the same time, when a piece of feedback shows up, how do we make sure that we address that in a way that customers feel heard, and it's not that, I just got a blanket statement from the brand online.
Absolutely. All right. So I have one last question for you three. What are the best practices which you think brands should follow to declutter themselves quickly from a fad, which sort of negatively impacts the reputation? David, do you want to take a stab at this one first?
Help me out with that one a little bit. What do you mean by a fad, Melissa? Treating CX as a fad? Do you think that's what the question, or?
I think more maybe just general fads. So, you don't want to jump on the bandwagon just because this other brand in your space is doing this, and they've got all either maybe positive or negative stuff going around. Maybe they're asking, do I pay attention to that? Do I just walk away from it? I think that's more what they're saying.
All right, great. So every CX leader has to understand what they stand for and what their company's brand promise is. CX is not about the touchy-feely, chasing the latest thing that might be out there. It's about figuring out ways to, at every step of the experience, deliver your brand promise, or frankly not, in which case the experience actually dilutes all the investment that people are making in their brand and their advertising and the marketing communications. So I think that's the first filter. Is this really relevant to your brand, and is it going to help your brand if we engage or not? And if it doesn't pass that, I would say watch it, make sure it doesn't explode, but there's no reason to actively participate in if you don't see a direct linkage to the value to your brand.
Great. Andy, Megan, anything else?
I was going to say, from a CX perspective, one of the more helpful exercises I see clients do is map out all of the different touch points across that customer journey, right? Whether it's B2B or whether it's B2C, where is this customer engaging with our brand, right? And if this fad, whatever it may be, has an impact on one of those, or could be an opportunity, could be a place of opportunity, then you certainly need to consider it and understand it. But it's monitoring and understanding all those touch points that will really give you a better feel for whether this is something you need to invest and dig in on, or is something that you can maybe weather and see and take a little bit more time to see if this is something that may pass.
Well said, Andy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that is all the time we have for our questions. I'd like to thank our speakers as well as our sponsor, Reputation. Some final reminders. Make sure you download the slides from Event Resources and check your email for a link to the on-demand recording. And if you enjoyed today's webinar, please check out the Adweek webinar calendar at adweek.com/webinars. Again, thank you to our speakers. Thank you to our audience for taking time out of your day to join us. And we look forward to seeing everyone at an upcoming Adweek webinar.